enjoying it because, like I said last week, I'm understanding it differently than I had in the past. You know, I think many, many great pastors and sincere, honest Christians who are trying to understand the book of Ecclesiastes often kind of just say like, well, here he talks about God, but here he's all vanity, vanity, and here he's this way, and then there he's that way again, and kind of makes him look like he's got some kind of a manic depressive thing going where he's just high, and then he's low, and then he's this, and then he's that. But really, as we studied this morning when we did verses 9 through 14 of chapter 12, this is the conclusion for the whole matter. The whole book had a purpose, and it is to have people fear God and keep his commandments. Therefore, as I read this book, when things seem confusing, when things don't really make sense, I need to keep in light of all that he's trying to get us to fear God and keep his commandments. And so that's the big key, is he talks about what's under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight, is his last two main arguments. I would say there's four main arguments in the book. And the first one was chapter 1, and it got us up to chapter 2, verses 24 to 26 was his closing argument. Then he continued from there on into chapter 5, and he finished in verses 18, 19, and 20, the last three verses of chapter 5, concluding his second main argument. And really what he's telling people thus far was, since under the sun, everything is vanity. You search and try and get more and more, bigger, better, and it's just never going to leave you satisfied. I was listening to one pastor, and it was sad. He was reading quotes of all these famous celebrities and movie stars and people, and all you hear from them is how empty they consider their lives to be. What was it? I mean, if I look at it, it was like Eddie Murphy was talking about this emptiness in his life. Dennis Rodman was commenting on how after all he's done and he continues to do, it just feels meaningless and unsatisfactory. He quoted Cher, quoted other people. I mean, they're just going down the list, and these people all feel like they're lacking. Now, so what he says, I guess the conclusion is, enjoy the things of this life that are given to you and just understand they're from the Lord. So when you get anything, whether good or bad, learn how to receive that as something from the Lord. Like, okay, Lord, maybe I need this. And that's kind of where tonight's going to take off, is a further examination of what we think is good and what we think is bad. But there was one thing that hit me after last Sunday night, and I had to go back and share it because I was just thinking, and I didn't have this written down. I didn't read it. It just hit me in the middle of the week this week. In chapter 5, verse 1, we talked about how it says, walk prudently when you go near the house of God, or watch your step, walk carefully. And we spent some time talking about that. And this came to my mind throughout the week. And I'm like, man, that was the perfect illustration. And I forgot to mention in it. Who knows what that picture is of? The southern steps. Alex, you did learn something in Israel. I always give him a hard time because he's like, I forget almost everything. But the southern steps, good job. All right, Alex, the bonus point number 2. Where do the southern steps lead? To the temple. You're right. Yeah, I guess I forgot to say it says southern steps in the back, so he helped make the slides, so he's a cheater. Maybe he didn't remember it from Israel. I was thinking you remembered something finally. No, but now here's the question. Now, this is an observation thing, though. And people online can't see this, I guess, but look at the picture. Can you make an observation about these steps? Something that stands out. I think I got hand motions over there. People are noticing. All of them? And that's the funny thing. When you look at these steps, if you notice a step that's kind of the middle left of the page, it's a narrow step. The next step is a wide step. Some are taller, some are shorter. And this was done intentionally so that no one could just meander up to the house of God without thinking about their steps. So this was something that was done when they built the second temple. It's still there today. We always do group photos on it and whatnot, but it's you watch your step as you come to the house of God. You can't just hurry up the stairs, it's actually kind of awkward because one's high, one's low, one's deep, one's long. And so you actually have to think about your steps. And this is ways the Jews did lots of things. Much stuff that we see today is just tradition, and it might be empty tradition for many of them. Much of it has roots in very intentional purpose things that were supposed to get people thinking. So I thought of that throughout the week, and I knew I had to share it. That was chapter 5. On to chapter 6. I'm going to be kind of putting my titles for our sections up as we go. And so chapter 6 is pretty much things aren't always as they seem, part 1. And this is all of chapter 6, and it's basically what might look to be good is actually bad. Verse 1, it says, "There's an evil which I've seen under the sun, and it's a common among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. For it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this has more rest than that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice, but has not seen goodness, do not all go to one place." So he starts off by two things in their culture for sure would be considered blessings. One of which was wealth. I think in our culture that's usually considered a blessing too. But also having many, many children. Large families were a blessing. That was the way that they believed, and many people still believe that today, that children are a blessing from the Lord. But then he says, if he has all this stuff but he cannot enjoy it, what was the point? If he has all this stuff and then someone else ends up getting it all because he dies and it gets inherited, or because it's stolen or it's lost. Many of us have seen the tragedy of Rocky V, where he loses all of his fortune, right? I mean, that's the idea is, what's the point of all of it if you lose it all? I'm sure there's lots of other stories. I don't know why Rocky comes to mind for me. But that's the idea, is that you had all this stuff and then it's gone. And then it says you have all these kids, but it talks about him not having a proper burial. What's the point of having this heritage of children if they're not even going to give you a proper burial when you die? What's the point if you're not going to be satisfied? And what he says is it's better for a stillborn child. What he's saying is that to live all this life, experience all the pain and all this stuff, yet never really have satisfaction, he says it'd be better if they never had to experience all the negative of this world, to leave this world and still never had any of the satisfaction that God would have given to that person. And do they not all go to one place? And so it's an interesting, and here's a good verse for you guys. You'll notice the stillborn child, do they not all go to one place? It's a good Bible verse to reference, and I still think we can use Ecclesiastes as inspired scripture for doctrine, that all children do go one place. Whether they don't see the light of day due to natural or unnatural causes, they all go to one place, and they all go to be in heaven with the Lord. When David wept over that child who he knew God was going to take, but he wept that God might be merciful. When the baby, the product of his sin with Bathsheba, died, he quits weeping. And he says, well, I hoped that God would let me keep the child, but now I know that I will go to where that child is waiting for me. And so it's just a good Bible text for us to know that unborn children do go to heaven, and they all go to one place. But now, verse 7 to 12, he continues on the same idea. What may look to be good is actually maybe not. All the labor of a man is for his mouth, or his flesh, literally, and yet the soul is not satisfied. For what more has the wise man than the fool? What does the poor have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This is also vanity and grasping for the wind. And so he's just saying, what's the deal being rich if poor people can understand how to receive what they have from God and live it joyously? What's the point of all this stuff? So the first, again, chapter 6 starts with what looks good might be bad. Chapter 7, we're going to get to what looks bad might be good. And he's just making this point, and he's driving it home. Things aren't always as they seem. And really, this middle, the third argument, that's the big point. Things aren't always as they seem. Verse 10, whatever one is, he has been named already, for it is known that he is man. He cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. Since there are many things that increase his vanity, how is man the better? For who knows what is good for man in life? It's a rhetorical question. All the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? Now, this is where I do believe that this book is like an evangelistic outreach. Solomon was trying to write, look at guys, everyone in the world. You know, it's one thing preaching to church folk. It's another thing where if you had a letter and it says kings and people from all over would come and listen to Solomon. So if you could hear from Solomon and he was going to tell you about everything there is to know, he's telling them about the world that they're familiar with. You can talk to people out of the church. They know the world. They know what it's like trying to make money, trying to get a car, trying to get a girl, trying to get a this, trying to get that. And so he's telling them, well, guys, you know who I am, right? You know that I've done bigger and better than any of you will ever achieve. And you're not going to get there. And so through the book, I think one of the reasons we don't see the name Yahweh one time and why Elohim, God, is just very seldom used is because I think he was actually using a tactful evangelistic pull, and he would throw these rhetorical questions in as he goes. Well, who does really know what is good? And who can really say what's going to happen after you die? And he just leaves it. He leaves the rhetorical questions and keeps on moving. It's not till the very end of the book. This is this conclusion. Fear God, obey his commandments. So for now, he's leaving this conclusion, and then he also says, who knows what was good, right? In verse 12, so that's chapter 7 now. As we start chapter 7, verses 1 to 14, things aren't always as they seem, part 2, bad may in fact be good. What you see and think is bad, well, maybe it's actually good. It says a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death better than the day of one's birth. Better to go into the house of mourning than into the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. You know, I have been privileged to have served multiple families in the Lower Valley by performing funeral services for people I've never met. It's like kind of like a friend of a friend thing. They say, I know this guy and he's a pastor. And he works for really cheap. And so I've never actually been paid for one of those. I go and I do it. And it's just because I want to see people be blessed and because you can't get me to a funeral without sharing the gospel. And that's the thing is I'm very tactful. You know, when people are mourning, I'm not going to, be silly and stupid. I'm going to read the book of Proverbs before I go. But in the house of mourning, that is the end of all men, and the living take it to heart. At the house of mourning, people are listening, and people are thinking about their mortality. They're thinking about life. They're thinking about death. They're considering these things. And so it's a great time to talk to people. So I would encourage, too, honestly, it is in some of these difficult and fragile times that truly people are listening, and they're thinking about God. I know this is none of you, but with me, quite often, God has gotten my attention and got me back on track in times of mourning, in times when all hell breaks loose in my life. All of a sudden, I'm way more attentive. When everything was fine and dandy, I just kind of did things my way. But God will allow heartache and pain and suffering to get our attention. He'll let things bad happen because all of a sudden we start paying attention. So this is where this chapter is now going. He says in verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of mirth, which is, they're thinking celebration and partying. How many of you know this feeling? You don't have to raise your hand, right? I have felt so sad and so depressed, and it's funny because people often try and cheer you up. You might even try and watch a movie, do something that gets your mind off of it. And yet I have experienced time and time again, the only medicinal cure to that sorrow is weeping. And sometimes it's so hard, like I don't want to cry or something. Sometimes it's like I just can't let it go. But when it finally happens, it's like medicine for the heart. It's like a cure to something that was broken, to just weep and let it all out. And often this is the case. A sad countenance, the heart is made better. Sometimes all of this, I've just watched so many believers, I think, struggle through their walk and their faith because they keep trying to fight it out. They keep trying to do a little better. They keep trying to make it on their own rather than maybe allow God to do the breaking in them He was trying to do the whole time. Like, yeah. And again, like, you don't have to make it a church every service every week. You don't have to always do this. You don't have to. But so often, the things that are healthy for us, we begin to slacken, and then God will allow heartache to hit ourselves, our families, and what ends up being the solution that we're thankful and joyous to do? We start getting back to church. I start breaking my Bible open in the mornings. I start praying again. He'll allow these things to bring us where we need to be. Verse 5, it is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, like a cooking fire, so is the laughter of the fool. And this is also vanity. Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. So it's talking about the foolish people trying to find other ways of consoling their friend. And the end, verse 8 of the thing is better than the beginning. The patient spirit is better than the proud spirit. Do not hasten your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. All these things are attitudes of when we mishandle or incorrectly respond to the things that God's putting on us. He's allowing things to try and break us, and so I get angry rather than broken. I become impatient rather than patiently waiting on the Lord. I begin to long for bigger and better or other things. It didn't used to be this way. I remember back when blah, 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 things were so much simpler back then. Things were better back then and back in the good old days. So he's encouraging to have the right mindset when you're going through these bad times that are really intended for our good. Count it all joy when you fall into various trials, James says in chapter 1 of James. Wisdom, verse 11, is good with an inheritance and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. He's going to shift in a little bit to wisdom. I feel like he's almost like wetting the palate, and then he's going to do one more thing, then hit hard on wisdom. Wisdom is a defense as money is a defense. You know, it kind of sounds funny maybe that the Bible would say that money is a defense, but I think he's trying to connect with people. I think everyone knows you have a big nest egg of money and you can solve some problems. That's like practical wisdom. So what he's trying to say is everyone knows that if you have a big stack of cash and problems come, very often things like broken refrigerators and broken cars and other problems can be fixed with a stack of cash. So he's trying to let them know wisdom fixes things too, and probably should be even more sought after. So he's taken what people already acknowledge, and he's tying in with wisdom. 13 and 14 wraps up this section. It says, consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. But in the day of adversity, consider. Surely God has appointed one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. It's the idea of becoming eternally minded. That man can find out nothing that will come after him. It's the idea that man is coming to this realization that I can't tell the future. I can't plan. James also exhorts, he says that don't make these big, long plans. Just say, well, Lord willing, if I'm still here tomorrow, I'm going to keep going on. But all these big plans for the future and never knowing if you're ever going to get there. I want to flip to a couple New Testament passages because to me, this is just a very applicable thing for all of us. And I want to flip to a section that's so familiar, I think, for many of us. But often it's never read in its context. Often the context of these verses are lost. And so Romans chapter 8, I don't know about you, but I quote verse 28 all the time. Romans 8:28. I mean, it's one of those verses you always got to be reminding yourself about. It's interesting because there are certain groups, churches, theologies, doctrines, right, who often quote verses 29 and 30, but they never do it with 28 to begin. And if you read 28, you really need to read 29 and 30. It's a package deal. The context explains things. You see, it says in verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So that's a great promise. That says that God can and will work out everything in your life for the good. I always like to say, it says the good, it's not necessarily always your good. It's God's good. Why do I say that? Well, sometimes God can use your mistake and your mishap to bless a whole lot of people. Recently, I was involved in a mishap. I wasn't the one involved, but that mishap radically transformed my life as I watched what is possible and what can happen. That's the idea, is I just watched it radically transform my life. In fact, my marriage changed. That Nicole and I talked as we watched and we see and we're like, we need changes in our family. We think we're doing good, but no, we need to do better. And that's the thing is, it works to everyone's good, but sometimes they can take a bad situation, which can still work to the good for those people as well, but often it can also be for everyone's good. But at the end of the day, when people repent or whenever else happens, we can be thankful that good is taking place. And man, Lord, I wish I didn't have to be the model on what not to do, but hey, praise you that a dozen marriages are going to be thriving, a dozen families are going to be better parenting, a dozen people are going to make better financial choices, right? If whatever maybe I did wrong, all these people can be blessed by it. But then check this out, verse 29. For whom he foreknew, that's you, he also predestined, he has a plan, to be conformed to the image of his Son. All of you, whom God always knew would be a Christian, he has a plan for you to become more like Jesus. That he might be the firstborn among many brethren, that Jesus will be the firstborn, the preeminent one. That word firstborn in the Greek, it's interesting because it doesn't necessarily mean like firstborn child. It's just the preeminent, dominant heir son, but that there'd be more of us like Jesus. Verse 30, moreover, whom he predestined, those he also called. Whom he called, these he justified. Whom he justified, these he also glorified. What is this talking about? Is simply this, is that if you are a Christian, God is going to make you be more like Jesus. In order to get you there, he's going to have to put you through some stuff, learning experiences. And that's the stuff where it might not feel good. It might not look good. I might not enjoy it at the time, but God has a plan. And it's going to work all things to the good. And that's what Solomon was trying to say. When all these things happen, when you realize that God is in control, just think about it. When joyful things happen, be joyful. But when bad things happen, consider it. Lord, why are you allowing this to happen to me? If you're a believer and you believe the Bible is true, then you should be able to try and work out a solution. Lord, why is this happening? If God, you work all things to the good, then I want to know, how am I going to grow from this? How am I going to become more conformed to the image of Jesus from the situation? And God, how can I not screw it up? Like, how can I handle this trial correctly and not let it throw me backwards? Instead, how can I take this hardship and allow it to thrust me forwards? And he wants us to be content. This I'm not going to talk about. I just want to read it because I think it totally applies. Philippians chapter 4, and I'm going to flip quick for sake of time and just read through this. Paul, in this idea of taking everything that comes at you and just learning to roll with it. He says, rejoice, be thankful, rejoice, have joy. In the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all man. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, make your requests be known to God, and the peace of God that surpasses understanding will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Finally, brethren, if you're not going to be anxious, right? So since we're not going to be anxious, what are we going to do with all that free time we now have? Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, those are hard words to speak as a pastor, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. All of us, if we allow God to conform us into the image of Jesus through trials, through suffering, through blessings, through hardships, through good, through bad, weeping and joy, we should be able to say to others, the stuff you saw me do these things. I'm a model for other people. I want to read down to 13. He says, but I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last your care for me has flourished again. Though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity, talking about their generosity to helping him. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. 1 Timothy 6:6, godliness with contentment is great gain, right? He says, I know how to be abased and how to abound. Everywhere in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and suffer need. Once again, context is king. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It looks great on a soccer t-shirt, but more correctly, it's the fact that I can handle and I can face everything this world throws at me because God has taught me how to be content. He's taught me how to be abased and abound, like everything's broken and crazy in life, or everything's just flourishing and going amazing. So this is the theme he's trying to get across, and we're going to move much quicker now as I go forward in Ecclesiastes. I appreciate you guys bearing with me. So verse 15, people aren't always as they seem. So bad things might actually be good. Now he's going to start talking about people and us and our attitudes. He says, I have seen everything in my days of vanity. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness. There's a wicked man who prolongs the life of his wickedness. He's saying, hey, I've seen just men perish, righteous men perish, and wicked men prosper. So what does he say? He says, do not be overly righteous. Bear with me. Do not be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? I think a key in here is do not be overly wise. I know you guys love Hebrew grammar lessons. Hithbael form, it's a reflexive verb, blah, blah, blah. I know, it's free information. But Proverbs 3:7 has the same word in the same form. And in Proverbs 3:7, it says, do not be wise in your own eyes. It's a reflexive verb, kind of meaning it's supposed to come back on you. And so truly, this is saying, don't be overly righteous or wise in your own eyes. He's not saying don't be righteous. It's the overly righteous folk that he's worried about. He also says, now I'm not saying be wicked either. He's like, don't go to the other end of the spectrum. But bear with, and you'll see what he's trying to describe. It is a good thing you grasp this. I think that's true. That's what he says. Solomon said it, so it has to be true. And also do not remove your hand from the other, for he who fears God will escape them all. Wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city, for there is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. This is the overly righteous. People who think, well, now that I'm a Christian, I am super righteous. I was preparing for this, and I just started thinking about, like, what must God think when people boast about their own righteousness? In the Bible, the men we see in the Bible continue to speak with more humility about their own righteousness and their own works as they grow in the faith. People like Peter and Paul read their writings in chronological order, like younger Paul the Apostle, Paul the apostle, right before his death, he goes from, I'm barely an apostle to I'm the chief of all sinners, right? His view of himself gets lower, not higher. And so he's exhorting people like, be careful. Don't start acting like you're all righteous now. Don't start now. He goes, now don't live like a fool. Don't go off sinning. I'm like, you're not supposed to look like you're a sinful person. But he's like, but don't start going around holier than thou. There is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Isaiah 64:6 is where it says, our righteousness is as filthy rags. I said this morning that you guys could go look it up on your own time, but you're the Sunday night crowd and you're hardcore. Filthy rags in Isaiah, it's used menstrual rags is what it's talking about. That's the literal Hebrew. So this is what he's saying. This is what your righteousness is when you start bragging. This is what God sees. It's supposed to be, food for thought. How about 1 Kings 8:46? He's saying to God, when they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin. Proverbs 20, verse 9, rhetorical question. Who can say, I have made my heart clean and I'm pure from sin? And the answer, nobody. Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. 1 John 1:8, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. The list goes on and on. I have met people who talk about, well, I've been a Christian for this long and I haven't sinned in 3 years. I'm like, you just lied. That's a sin. But and it's like, I haven't sinned in this long. Can I ask your wife that question? And that's the thing is like, no, just with humility. Now I can say like, oh yeah, by the power of the Holy Spirit, I've been freed from a whole bunch of popular and blatant sins. And it's been a while since I've done these things. Praise God. But I'm still a sinner. And I still struggle with all these inward things and trying to be the man that I am supposed to be. And so, he says, verse 21 and 22, is just again food for thought. Also, do not take heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. For many times also your own heart has known that even you have cursed others. We all should think about these two verses for a second. I mean, that's the idea is, judge not, lest ye be judged. The most popular verse in the Bible with atheists. Judge not. They just don't even read the rest. But what does Jesus say? Remember that with the same measure you judge, you'll be measured back. It's this idea of hypocritical judgment that we need to think about it. When other people sin against us, it's like, man, that person was rude to me. You got to stop for a second and be like, because you're never rude to anyone, right? I mean, we think about this stuff. Well, that person did this because you never do that? Man, they said something bad about me because you only ever say nice thing about everyone else. That's what Solomon's trying to say is like, do not become overly righteous in your own mind. People aren't always what they look like. You see someone like, that's a real holy guy right there. Get to know him better. Talk to them and they'll usually confess. If they're really a holy guy, they'll usually confess about how unholy they are. So, he kind of wraps up just his wisdom about knowing who we are and how we are. Verse 23, all this I have proved by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to seek, and to search out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness, and I find more bitter than death, the woman whose heart snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. And he's just talking about all the types of people in the world, the things we deal with. He goes, man, the seductive woman, that was one of the worst things and types of people I ran into. Verse 27, here is what I have found, says the preacher, adding one thing to the other to find out reason, which my soul still seeks but cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Truly, this only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. This is supposed to be poetic in nature. One man in 1,000, and not even one woman. That's not supposed to say that men are better or that women are more immoral. If you remember back in chapter 7, 8, wisdom is personified as a woman in Proverbs, right? So it's not a man-woman thing. He's just speaking poetically. Man, 1,000 men and not one woman in that group. Only one person was actually kind of righteous. And it's supposed to just point out, God made man upright. But they, mankind, have sought out many schemes. People think that they're all holy and good, but man, we blow it all the time. So he goes into a little bit of a talk about government, obeying the government, even if it isn't always good. Things aren't always as they seem. He says, who is like a wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the sternness of his face is changed. There's these little proverbs kind of stuck in between sections. They kind of relate and kind of tie things in. But he's talking about wisdom. And he said, so I say, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. Where the word of a king is, there is power, and who may say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful, and a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. This is actually, you could translate it like, yet a wise man's heart, though a wise man's heart. What he's saying is, again, this is kind of what we see in Romans 13. We see it in the New Testament in Titus and in Peter about obeying the governing authorities. That's been kind of popular text to try and discuss what does it mean in the day and age we're living in. But what he's mainly saying here is, in general, yeah, that's what we're called to do. But he also says, yet a wise man's heart discerns both the time and judgment. Then he says, well, a wise man's still going to pay attention to what's going on and discern. You don't do this blindly, but you do it obediently. That makes sense? We don't obey blindly, but we will do it obediently. I'm going to obey when I can obey, as I can and should obey. And at the same time, it's not like a blind obedience where you just do whatever just because. Verse 6, because every matter there is a time and a judgment. Though the misery of man increases greatly, for he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur? No one has power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, and no one has a power in the day of death. There is no release from that war, and the wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. All this I have seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. And so he's kind of wrapping this up. He's saying, he acknowledges that there are times when there are bad leaders and they rule over others to their own hurt. Now he's going to wrap up this section. The conclusion is verse 15 of this third section of the book of Ecclesiastes. So he says, then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. And this was also vanity, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore, the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. He's talking about when the government doesn't do justice, when they're not executing justice in time, and the wickedness and all these things that still happen. So it's like, yeah, the government doesn't always do things the way they're supposed to do. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. So he's saying, though you see injustice in government, whether it's high or low, police to the politics, he says, but I will say that I know it's going to be good. It's going to turn out okay for those who fear God. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. There is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked, and again there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said this is also vanity. So he's wrapping us all up. Some things that look good are bad, some things that look bad are good. We need to obey the government, but sometimes they don't do their job. Sometimes the wicked prosper. It doesn't look like it's the way it's supposed to be. So what does he say in verse 15 to kind of summarize the whole thing? So I commended enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry, for this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. Again, this isn't hedonism or Epicureanism or other isms and big words for, he's not just saying go out and party and just eat, drink, be merry. What he's saying is while you're under the sun, be content. Like we wrote with Paul, I've learned to be content, whether hungry or full. Back in chapter 2, verses 24 to 26, the end of the first section, his argument was, I have learned that to truly be content with food and clothing and housing, it's a gift from God. So he acknowledges the only way you can have this contentment with simply eating and drinking and being merry. Like just enjoying having the stuff on the table and having your family. I have a house over my head. I have a car that drives. Well, it's a God-given gift if you can truly be happy with just those things. And wouldn't we all like that? Like, we all want a bigger, better this, but if I was satisfied, sometimes people forget, if I get this, then I'll be satisfied. So you think. Yet, if God could just give you satisfaction, wouldn't you take it? Well, no, I need a 65-inch TV for satisfaction. What if God could make you satisfied with 60? What if he can make you satisfied with 42? I know that's the idea, though, is like we, in our minds, set the bar of what I'll be satisfied when, but Solomon said in chapter 5, he who desires silver won't be satisfied by silver. And so the idea is we need to seek out the Lord and seek him, and he'll give us satisfaction where we're at with what we have. All right. Last sections. Big section. Though God's ways are mysterious, be joyful and work hard, even though things don't make sense. So he says in verse 16, when I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see busyness that was done on the earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that he has done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it. So trying to figure out God's ways. We try and figure out God. Well, only if I knew, God, show me and then I'll believe. Show me and then I'll obey. And God's like, no, that's not how I work. Believe in the mystery, in the things that don't always make sense. See, faith is not faith if it all makes sense. Faith is not faith if it's something that cannot be broken or changed and you cannot see it going wrong. Like, faith is sitting in a chair, and that's the action of, I know the chair is not going to fall apart. I sat in it, that's the action of faith, because I believe the chair is going to hold. People are searching out, they want like the blueprints of the chair, they want the welding ratings on it, they want all this stuff before they sit in it, and God's like, no, sit in the chair, trust me. So chapter 9, verse 1, I considered all this in my heart, so that I could declare it all, that the righteousness of the wise and their works are in the hand of God. People know neither love nor hatred by anything they see before them. All things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the clean and the unclean. To him who sacrifices, to him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath and he who fears an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that one thing happens to all. Truly the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But for him who is joined to the living, there is a hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. What he's saying is all these people keep doing all these things, but while you're alive, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's not quite clicking, even if it's kind of mysterious, as long as you have breath in your lungs, you can still live for God. You can still make steps for God. You can still grow. You can still make change. You can still bear fruit. Jesus said in John 9:4 about how we need to work while it's still the light, for darkness is going to come when no man can work. He's saying, like, as long as you're alive, you've got a chance to live for God. But one day, that's going to come to an end, and every opportunity to change, every opportunity to go back and make right, it's going to be gone. And we all should know we're not promised tomorrow. We can't put off reconciliation. We can't put off getting our act cleaned up, getting rid of the sin that we've been kind of just, toting along with us, hoping that one little thing will be okay, while we're continuing trying to be good and do all these other things. So it says in 5 and 6, for the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. It's just his way of trying to say life is short. He's trying to emphasize that look at the dead people. They don't have a chance anymore. You still have a chance. So he's painting this picture, and again, I think reaching out to unbelievers. Life is short. So verse 7, go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart. For God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. I don't know how many of you need to hear that one. For God has already accepted your works. Sometimes it's like, I'm not good enough. My works aren't good enough. I'm not gifted enough. I'm not as good as that other person. And if I was better at things, if I could talk like that one person, if I could play or sing, I'm not good with kids. And if I could, I'm shy, I don't have much money, I'm not really good with my hands. God's accepted your works. He's saying, God accepts every offering you give to him with a pure heart. And he's going to get into this if I only was like them thing here in just a few verses. But he encourages them, let your garments be white. Just serve him, knowing that he'll receive your offering if you give it to him freely out of love. Let your garments be white. Be pure. Let your head lack no oil. Oil is often a picture of the Holy Spirit, that anointing we get. Be filled with the Spirit. Serve God. Love God. Don't worry about not knowing how it all works. Just love him. Verse 9, live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun, all the days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and the labor which you perform under the sun. He's saying, hey, rejoice in the wife of your youth. Enjoy that you're at a family. Enjoy your kids. Enjoy your house. Enjoy what God has given you. He says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going. He's saying, in all that you do it with all that you got. Do all things without complaining or disputing. That's one of my son's memory verses. Do all things as unto the Lord. There's a whole lot of good New Testament verses in those epistles encouraging people to just, while you're alive, use it for God. If you have breath in your lungs, earn some heavenly rewards and glorify your Father in heaven. And so this whole, I'm not good enough, I don't have a good enough thing to offer. He says in verse 11, I returned and saw the sun, that the race is not to the swift, the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the men of understanding, nor favor to the men of skill or knowledge or learning. But time and chance happen to them all. For man also does not know his time, like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare. So the sons of men are snared in an evil time when it falls suddenly upon them. One pastor did a great job. I was going to write it up there, and I'm sad I didn't do it. I forgot it in my notes. But he just went and looked at this list, the swift, the strong, the wise. Look at the people in the Bible who personifies these traits. Swift in the Bible, a little less known, but Asael, the brother of Joab and Abishai. He was swift as a gazelle. Well, in 2 Samuel chapter 2, he gets taken with the butt end of a spear as he's going after Abner. And so you see strong. Well, who's stronger than Samson? Look how that went. I mean, just for what it's worth. Who is the wisest in all the Bible? Solomon. Yet in chapter 11 of 1 Kings, we find out, man, he loses, his connection with God. He goes off and starts worshiping pagan idols and having these wives who turn his heart away. Now, men of understanding, he listed Ahithophel, which was David's chief counselor, but he betrayed David and went with Absalom. And when Hushai came in and gives all this other advice, Ahithophel ends up hanging himself because even though he was the wise, understanding, he knew strategy and what to do, but it didn't work out for him. And even the learnedness, that's that skill. It's not like a skill like you're skillful, but like skills. You know how to do things. And Acts 7:22 tells us that Moses was learned in all the knowledge and wisdom of the Egyptians. Didn't stop Moses from murdering a dude in chapter 2 of Exodus. And it didn't stop him from smacking the rock again in chapter 20 of Numbers, right? I mean, we see these things again and again and again. That the men who've had it all, some of them have had bad endings, have made horrible choices. Better to just know, I don't have to have all these blessings and skills and talents. Just, God, I'm going to give you what I got to give you. Let that be yours. Give God what you have to give. He'll take it with joy. And so verse 13, he starts going into these pieces on wisdom. He's wrapping up the book. We did enter that fourth section, and so I think he's trying to conclude and wrap things up. And so even though he said don't chase wisdom too much, he's going to do a bunch of exhortations and a lot of proverbs, like the book of Proverbs. So I think we're going to move a little quicker through those because they're very reflective of the book of Proverbs, which we just studied. But he says, this wisdom I have seen under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, and built snares around it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no one remembered the same poor man. Then I said, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. Words of the wise, spoken quietly, should be heard, rather than the shout of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And chapter 10, verse 1 is kind of a proverb based on that story, saying, dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment and cause it to give off a foul odor. So does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor. So what he's saying is that this man had wisdom, it saved the day, but people really weren't even that thankful. They didn't, he was forgotten about. And so what Solomon is saying is, man, wisdom's good, seek it, but don't expect necessarily to be appreciated. Don't be surprised if you actually know the right thing. I don't know, I'm going to just say older, and you can all define that how you want to define that. But some of the older people in the room might know the feeling of having wisdom, and then you watch the younger people making the choices, and you're like, well, I could tell you what to do and how that's going to turn out, but people are like, well, you're going to figure it out on your own, aren't you? And oftentimes that's the way it can be, is wisdom is not respected by other people. So Solomon's saying, get it, but don't be surprised when people don't happily receive it, because you'll have people who talk bad. And it's funny how someone says something smart, but one foolish person, that's dumb. People are like, yeah, that's dumb. They always seem to follow that guy. And so that's what he's saying, the flies. You have a beautiful thing of perfume, yet some flies can ruin the whole batch of perfume, where it's no longer beautiful. And now he's going to get into this idea of the foolish person ruining it. So now he's going to talk about, did I miss a section? No, I put it both on one slide. There was to 18. So now, wisdom in relationships. That was the segue. I didn't realize I had one slide. So 1 to 7, he says, verse 2, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's at his left. So right hand, the wise man keeps his heart in check. Even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone that he is a fool. If the spirit of a ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation or healing pacifies great offenses. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, as an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, while the rich sit in a lowly place. I have seen servants on horses, while princes walk on the ground like servants. He's saying, be wise with your friends. Understand there's foolish people. They're going to drag you down, and you'll watch that bad people or foolish friends are going to make foolish decisions. And he uses the picture of this foolish leader taking the rich and putting them in lowly places. Now, this is where in their culture, they would equate the rich, they're rich for a reason, i.e., they would be landowners, they would be business owners, these would be wise people, but this ruler's putting them in bad places. And typically, princes ride on the horse, the servants walk. He goes, but this guy's making the servants get on the horse and the prince walk. So he's just saying, be wise with the people you surround you with, because they might do some really foolish things. Plan wisely. It says, he who digs a pit will fall into it if you're not careful. He who breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent if you're not careful. He who quarries stone may be hurt by them if you're not careful. Right? I mean, that's the idea. If you're not wise, these simple tasks can become dangerous. He who splits wood may be endangered by it if the axe is dull. And one who does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. But wisdom brings success. So he's telling us to plan and do things wisely. And then A serpent may bite when it's not charmed. And this is like a segue verse, because that's like a wisdom thing. Like, don't go after the serpent if you don't have the charmer or the guy with the flute, right? Like someone's kind of distracting the serpent. And the babbler is no different. Now he starts talking about wisdom in speech and thought. Again, a lot of this reflects Proverbs, and so we've just recently done this. Is the words, verse 12, of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. The words of his mouth begin with foolishness, and the end of his talk is raving madness. A fool multiplies words. No man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what will be after him? The labor of fools wearies them, for they do not even know how to go to the city. He's just talking about fools just talk, talk, talk. They open their mouth. They're not listeners. Verse 16, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, when your king is a son of nobles, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Because of laziness, the building decays, and through idleness of hands, the house leaks. A feast is made for laughter, and wine makes merry, but money answers everything. That's verse 19 is it's supposed to be their attitude. Well, if, feast is for laughter, wine makes merry, and money fixes everything. This is not advice. This is supposed to be from the mouth of the foolish people. Just, we'll fix it all. It doesn't really matter. So he's saying, be wise in speech and thought, but, verse 20, even if the leadership of the land is bad, notice verse 20, do not curse the king, even in your thought. Do not curse the rich, even in your bedroom. For a bird of the air may carry your voice, and a bird in flight may tell the matter. I will say this concerning politics, is that I do think we live in a day and age where people need to be informed about politics. People need to be informed about policies and things they don't understand. They need to be informed about which people support which policies so that Christians can make educated decisions. But on the flip side, I don't think Christians should trash talk. Anyone got a verse for me saying otherwise, right? I mean, I don't think we should be trash talking people. And one of the number one reasons why, be honest, I'm most likely going to be a Republican. On a lot of things. And yet I have a lot of Democrat people I kind of want to see, come to Jesus. And trash talking something that's really important and personal to them isn't going to get me any brownie points on their eternal salvation. Now, we need to be into politics and understand policies, but talking trash about the king or other people, it just doesn't do us good. Now, taking a stand and a protest, if there was unjust things, that's okay. But I'm just saying, our attitude, where's our heart at? Are we just talking trash, or are we actually just trying to inform people? These are the policies. This is why I could never vote for that person. This is why, for the most part, I could never vote for that party because of these stances on these issues. I can't support abortion. I can't support certain things. And it's tough when there's issues from this party and issues from this party where, I would vote for that issue that party does, but sadly they also do this, this, and this, and I can't support those things. And so, key point, don't curse the king. Just try your best not to talk trash about people, inform people, educate people, expose bad things, but we can do it in such a manner where we're not trash talking. All right, chapter 11 is really short, and we only have a few verses in chapter 12 to do. Chapter 11 is about living generously even in uncertainty. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. This cast your bread upon the waters, it's funny to read the different people's thoughts on what it means. There's actually Arabic proverbs that are very similar to this, that people believe actually predate this, and that's not wrong or bad. They're saying Solomon was probably using a proverb that people understood, and it was actually about taking it and spreading it out, and even potentially sending it off on ships, and a voyage will go away, and you don't know if that ship's coming back then, right? You're doing a trip to the West Indies. That's more of a modern, more modern than this. But you didn't know if that ship was ever coming home. But when those sailing ships made those trips and came back, they went to China and came back. They went to India. They went to Americas, came back to Europe. They brought back a lot of money because it was a very profitable thing. But it's just saying invest, even if you don't know if it's going to come back. Give a serving to 7. That's that number of completeness. Go for 8. He's trying to go one up from that. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. If a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. What he's saying is, guys, what's going to happen is going to happen. If a tree falls this way, guess what? It's going to fall this way. Or it might fall that way. But if you sit there observing the wind and like, oh, I don't know if I should plant, I don't know if I should wait, I don't know if I should, you're never going to get a field. So we need to invest in people. Be giving, be generous, even if you don't know necessarily how it's going to pan out. Verse 5, you do not know the way of the wind or how bones grow in the womb of her who is with child. So you do not know the works of God who makes everything. In the morning you sow your seed, in the evening you do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, whether both alike will be good. Truly the light is sweet and is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man lives many years and rejoices in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many, and that is coming is vanity. There's going to be a time where you can no longer give. Give while you still can. Be generous. You're going to get to some place in life and you're going to have this big bank account and realize, wow, like there's a whole lot of people I could have blessed along the way. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're the one who needs to be blessed. The point is live with an open hand. And know that you need to live accordingly because death is a certainty. So you give generously, even in uncertainty, even if you don't know, you have the ability. I don't know if I should be giving. You just give. But also live accordingly. Think about how you live because death is a certainty. He says, rejoice, O young man, in verse 9, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart, in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. This is really wrapping up the book now. Therefore, remove sorrow from your heart, put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. What's vanity again? It's that what vanishes. Anyone here remember being a child? It was kind of like fast, right? It's like over and gone now. And it's funny, like, I love this one. This is a great, we've got like a high school age kid here. This is perfect. How many people remember like how horrible they thought high school was? And then after you get out of high school, you're like, dude, that was so easy and so laid back. Like, not a problem in the world. Like, high school, all I did was hang out with friends. Like, I had some homework to do. It's like, I get a job. You know, it's funny. I love hearing the kids coming back after graduation. Like, man, I've been working. They've been out working for 6 months. They're talking about high school was pretty laid back, pretty chill. Yeah, youth is vanity. It just disappears, and it ain't coming back anytime soon. But he's saying, he's like, man, God's going to bring everything into judgment, so think about how you live. Verse 1 of chapter 12, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth before the difficult days come. And as the years draw near, when you say, I have no pleasure in them. Some of you are getting into golden years. Other people have a lot of life ahead of them if the Lord doesn't return. What he's saying is while you still have a body to give, while you still have energy to give, while you still have anything to give it, live it, do it. Because he's saying you're going to get old and you won't be able to do this as you could have. You can give wisdom. There's a lot of great things. I mean, that's the thing. Is like God always has uses for everyone. I think if there's breath in our lungs, and I would say even the most prized and most cherished of all ministries is the one that anyone can do, and that is the ministry of the prayer warrior. And I think of people like Corrie ten Boom when she was bedridden in the last years of her life, and Pastor Chuck used to go and visit her and talk to her, and because she was attending, listening to tapes, I guess, his church. And it was just like, but in many ways, she thought that more work was done while she was bedridden than all the stuff she did preaching about the Holocaust and on all the stories. For those who know Corrie ten Boom and her powerful testimony, she thought more was done in those years of prayer than was on all the speaking engagements and all the stuff she did. So we all have to the very last day ministries we can do, but there is a lot of ministries that there is a ticking clock. There we go. It clicks kind of too. And so now he just describes, we're going to wrap up with this description of growing old. It's great. It's very poetic, so I'm going to try and give you what most scholars, they debated a little bit, but I'll give you what I think made sense and what I've read a lot of scholars. So verse 2, when the sun and light, you might want to write this down. I'm just giving you a warning. While the sun, verse 2, and light and the moon and stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. It's talking about the fogginess of memory loss, and things are just starting to dim down. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, your arms, and the strong men bow down, your legs. When the grinders cease because they are few, your teeth. And those who look through the windows grow dim, your eyesight. When the doors are shut in the streets, your mouth, and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird. Some people think it's the sound of your hearing gets worse, and yet, for some reason, I can't hear anything during the day, yet one little bird chirps and I'm awake in the middle of the night. It's like sleeplessness comes upon you. And all the daughters of music are brought low. Just enjoyment in general dims down. Also, they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way. Just a general paranoia coming upon you. When the almond tree blossoms, the white blossoms of white hair. The grasshopper is a burden and desire fails. It's strength and vigor going. A desire, truly, it's the wording there for sexual desire, just food for thought, but that's what it's talking about. And a man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. This last section, people think is like your organs. They have a hard time pinning each one down. But remember your Creator, before the silver cord is loosed, the golden bowl is broken, the pitcher shattered at the fountain, and the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. I want to just read this to close rather than comment, because it's kind of depressing, right, ending, since we did the last few verses this morning. But chapter 4 of Timothy is always super special to me because these are Paul's last words we have written. This is the last book that Paul the Apostle wrote, and Paul believed he was going to be executed. So Paul was under the full belief his life was about to come to an end, and literally it could have been written the day before he was going to stand before Caesar Nero and potentially be executed. So he starts in verses 1 to 5, and I'm just going to skip over those, but it's the final exhortation to Timothy. If you're a person who wants to serve the Lord, that's a great final charge, the last commands he gives before he goes. And in verse 6, for I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. It's loved and longed for, and appearing is in the future. It's the idea, it's not just that he came, but that he is going to come again, and that we live and long for that. Paul could say, I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. I pray that we all can say that. I've been poured out as a drink offering. How's that? Well, you take the whole cup with all the fluid and the offering, they pour the whole thing out. Oh, that we could say when we depart, yep, everything got poured out, God. There wasn't a drop left when I was done. I gave you everything when I was young. I gave you everything in the middle, and I gave you everything at the end. And to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant, as our prize. So, Ecclesiastes, there's the book. It is man's all. Fear God, obey his commandments, give him our everything. Even if it's uncertain, even if we don't know how it's going to turn out, give him our everything. And so now we've got another 45 minutes left tonight to give him our everything. Let's pray. Let's worship. Let's seek his face.